My name is Natalie Brennan. I'm 35 years old, and 6 months ago I sold the only investment property I ever owned and drained every cent of my savings to pay off my parents' mortgage. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because they were about to lose everything, and I was the only one left who could fix it. Last night at 1, 2, 4, 3 a.m., my mother texted me, "Don't come to your sister's wedding. It's better for everyone if you stay away." A second message followed. "Camille wants her day to be perfect. She's inviting important guests from Ryan's family. We can celebrate with you another time." I sat alone in my apartment, the same apartment I couldn't afford to renovate because I had chosen to save theirs. My fingers went cold around the phone as I realized I wasn't being left out by accident. I was being removed. Strategically. Quietly. So I wouldn't ruin the illusion. They weren't ashamed to take my money. But they were ashamed to claim me. And somehow Camille, the sister who burned through their retirement fake job offers and once used my name to open a credit card, was still the daughter worth protecting. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not out of rage, but clarity. I had always shown up when it mattered. This time I would show them what absence really looked like. I sat up slowly, heart pounding now, and turned on the bedside lamp. The rest of the room came into focus. Bookside stacked next to the bed. A glass of water still half full. My laptop closed but glowing faintly at the edge. Everything looked exactly the same, and yet something had just shifted. Something permanent. Another message pinged. "Camille wants her day to be perfect. No drama, just joy. Please try to understand." Of course it was Camille. My younger sister had always been the center of their world, no matter how many times she wrecked it. Even when she quit her third job in a year or racked up tens of thousands on their credit cards planning business retreats for her influencer brand, they coddled her like she was some delicate crystal ballerina. Meanwhile, I was the one who had to act like the adult since I was old enough to hold a pen. 6 months ago, they called me in a panic. The house on Lake Sammamish was about to go into foreclosure. Camille had pulled money out of it through some startup loan she never repaid, and my parents had dipped into their retirement fund to cover her momentary liquidity issue. When the bank notice came, they called me. Not Camille. Me. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated part of my brokerage account, sold off a condo I'd been renting in Portland, and wired $540,000 to clear the mortgage. They signed a contract my lawyer drafted, giving me full control of the deed until they could pay me back or start paying rent. It was a formality. They were desperate. "We love you. We'll make this right. You saved us." That's what they said. I'd barely heard from them since. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and walked to the safe embedded in the hallway cabinet. The code was muscle memory now. Inside, among tax returns and a passport I rarely used, was a thin manila folder. I pulled it out and stared at the label I'd printed: Lake House Agreement. Signed June 2023. The phone buzzed again. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Sure enough, Camille. Her tone was as sugary as ever. "Hey Nat, hope you're not mad. I just really need everything to go smoothly. Ryan's parents are flying in from Napa, and we've got some major people from his firm attending. You can be a little intense." Sometimes, I knew exactly what she meant by intense. It was her favorite word when I reminded her to repay the $8,000 I'd lent her 3 years ago. When I asked why she bought a second luxury SUV after leaving her marketing job at Velocity. When I had the audacity to suggest she stop dipping into mom and dad's retirement account. Being intense was code for being responsible. It was code for saying what no one else had the spine to say. I carried the folder to my desk, turned on the small lamp, and flipped it open. The signatures were all there. The notarized copy. The clause stating that they had 6 months to either purchase the house from me at market value or begin monthly rent payments by the 1st of January. Failure to comply would trigger eviction proceedings. I had drafted it to protect myself. I didn't think I'd actually need to use it. Apparently, I'd been wrong. My fingers hovered over my phone, ready to respond to Camille's text. I considered all the things I could say. All the years I'd kept quiet to keep the peace. All the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of family. And then I typed one word. Okay, not sarcasm, not venom. Just release. Then I opened my laptop and clicked into the contact labeled Maya Dawson Real Estate Counsel. I hit call. She picked up on the third ring. Sorry to call so late, I said. I need to activate the agreement. You sure? She asked, her voice low but alert. Yes. And I want them to receive it the morning of the 16th of December. Camille's wedding. Understood. I'll file the notice first thing tomorrow. I closed the folder and stared at the ceiling for a long time after the call ended. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean, deliberate, like something had finally been put in motion that should have started years ago. Back in bed, I watched the city lights flicker along the skyline. The wedding would be at some mountain resort Camille rented, complete with lanterns and champagne fountains and people who called themselves legacy entrepreneurs. She'd post 100 filtered photos to show how perfect her life was, and maybe for a few hours she'd believe it. But I'd stopped believing a long time ago. I turned off the lamp and let the dark come back. Sleep never came. I lay in bed watching shadows shift across the ceiling, waiting for my mind to slow down. But instead, it kept looping back to that call 2 years ago. The one that started it all. It was early spring of 2021 when my dad called me from the hospital parking lot. His voice cracked before he said anything real. He told me the mortgage on the lake house was in default. They had received the final notice 30 days before foreclosure. He said they didn't know what else to do. Camille had tried some new venture, something about digital events and personal branding, and she'd taken out a home equity loan to fund it. When that collapsed, my parents used their own retirement savings to keep her afloat. And now they had nothing left. I didn't ask why Camille hadn't called me herself. I already knew. She never asked me for money directly. She knew I would ask questions. That evening I sat on my balcony overlooking the sound glass of wine untouched, scrolling through options. I had shares from Apex Dynamics, a tech company I helped scale from 20 employees to over 300. We had gone public the year before, and while I didn't become a billionaire like some of our execs, I walked away with enough to buy comfort. A second condo in Portland. A solid brokerage account. Quiet security. By midnight, I had decided. The next day, I sold off a portion of my shares and called Maya to draft the paperwork. I didn't want them to feel humiliated, but I also knew Camille's name was all over the disaster. If I was going to cover nearly $500,000 to save their home, I needed protection. The agreement was simple. I would pay off the remaining balance on the mortgage and assume ownership. They could continue living there under a rent-free arrangement for 6 months. After that, they could either buy the house back at market value or begin paying monthly rent. If neither happened, I would have the legal right to reclaim the property. They signed the contract that same week without hesitation. My mom cried as she handed it back to me, gripping my hands with trembling fingers. You've always been our rock, Natalie. We don't deserve you. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted peace of mind. I wanted to believe that this time maybe they'd finally see me for what I was, not what I wasn't. But of course it didn't stick. Camille threw a party just 3 months later. Some rooftop thing in downtown Bellevue with a live jazz band and signature cocktails. My name wasn't on the guest list, neither was my contribution. When someone asked how they were managing to keep the house, Mom laughed and said something about refinancing and smart budgeting. I was sitting at the kitchen island of my apartment when I saw the photos pop up on Camille's page. Her standing on a balcony in a sequin jumpsuit captioned Founder's Energy. Dozens of likes from people I didn't know, some of them mutual friends. In the background, I could see my parents smiling as if nothing had ever happened. I closed the app and stared at my untouched dinner. A bottle of soy sauce sat on the counter. I remember it because I knocked it over by accident and it spilled down the cabinets. I didn't clean it up right away. I just stood there watching it pool at my feet. That was the moment something in me hardened. My whole life, Camille had been the dazzling one. The fun one. The beautiful disaster everyone forgave. I was the structured one. The planner. The The one who made sure there was always enough money to keep the lights on when Dad's consulting gigs dried up or when Camille needed another bailout. Growing up, they used to joke that I came out of the womb with a spreadsheet. Camille was the dancer, the performer, the charmer. She won pageants, scholarships, followers. I got good grades, made practical choices, and started working full-time before my 23rd birthday. When I moved out at 25, it was into a studio apartment I could barely afford, but I never once asked them for help. When Camille moved out, she brought her laundry back twice a week and borrowed their car for almost a year. They called her resilient. They called me intense. I didn't resent her. Not at first. I believed she'd grow out of it. That eventually responsibility would catch up to her and we'd stand on even ground. But it never did. Because every time she fell, they softened the landing. Every time she lied, they looked away. And when I spoke up, I was accused of ruining the mood. Now I was being excluded from the most important day of her life because I might bring discomfort. I stood and walked to the window looking out at the sleeping city. The lights stretched in neat grids, a city that ran on systems and rules. That was the world I understood. The one I could manage. I thought of the lake house. The smell of cedar after rain. The long summer evenings I used to spend reading on the back deck when Camille would blast music from her phone and dance like no one was watching. I used to think that was freedom. Now I knew it was denial. I walked back to the desk and opened the folder again, reading every line. The signatures. The notarized date. The clause that gave me the power I had never wanted to use. I traced my finger along the edge of the paper. 6 months. They had until the 1st of January. My phone vibrated one more time, a calendar alert reminding me of Camille's wedding weekend. She had sent a digital invite weeks ago. I hadn't RSVP'd. She never followed up. I closed the folder and placed it back in the safe. I didn't need to look at it again. Not until it was time. For now, I just needed to get through the night. I spent the next morning going through old emails, invoices, and account statements, not because I was looking for anything in particular, but because something inside me had shifted. I wanted to see clearly now without the emotional fog that had followed me for years. There was a folder buried deep in my archived inbox labeled James. I hadn't opened it in nearly 4 years. Just seeing his name made my chest tighten. James Grant had been the one person I thought saw me. Not as the responsible daughter or the fallback plan or the one who always showed up when no one else did. He saw me as someone steady, someone he could build a life with. We met at a networking event in Capitol Hill of all places. He worked in software engineering, smart and easygoing, always made people laugh without trying too hard. We dated for almost 2 years. He met my parents, helped me repaint the lake house guest room one summer, even talked about buying a place together in Kirkland. And then, almost overnight, it ended. At the time, I couldn't piece it together. There was no fight, no infidelity, no tragedy. Just distance. He pulled back, started canceling plans, hesitated when he looked at me. I asked him once during what turned out to be our last dinner if something had changed. He hesitated before saying that I could be hard to talk to. That I always needed control. That maybe we weren't as compatible as he thought. I remember going home that night and sitting in the dark for hours trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. I blamed myself. I always did. Weeks later, I found out the truth. A mutual friend mentioned that Camille had reached out to James behind my back. She told him I was emotionally closed off, that I had a history of being controlling in past relationships. That I'd pressured an old boyfriend to sign a joint lease too early, something that never happened. She had framed it as concern. Just trying to help, she said. I confronted her. It was the first and only time I raised my voice to Camille in front of our parents. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, arms crossed, and said I was being paranoid. She had only answered questions James asked. She was trying to protect me from getting hurt. Then she started crying. My mom rushed to her side. My dad asked me to leave. I remember walking out of that house feeling like the villain in my own story. I never heard from James again. That night, I added a new rule to the quiet list I kept in my head. Never trust Camille with what matters. I closed the email archive and leaned back in my chair staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just favoritism, it was something deeper. They didn't just excuse Camille's behavior. They invested in it. They defended it nourished. It turned her into a storm they refused to acknowledge. And when I spoke up, I was told to calm down. That I was making things worse. That I should be the bigger person. Being the bigger person had made me feel small for years. I stood and crossed the room to my filing cabinet, digging through receipts and bank statements for my year-end taxes. As I sorted through documents, one envelope slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. It was addressed to me, but not in my handwriting. It was a copy of a credit card statement from late 2022. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. My name was on the account, but the charges weren't mine. Luxury spa packages in Los Angeles. A boutique clothing store in Santa Monica. A hotel booking in Palm Springs during a weekend I was hosting a product launch in Seattle. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the pages. The card had been opened in my name. My social security number. My email address slightly misspelled. My mailing address matched my parents' house. There was a charge for a designer dress from a store Camille posted about on Instagram last year. I sat down slowly. My hands were shaking. I remembered calling the credit card company months ago when I received a promotional offer from a bank I didn't recognize. They said I already had an account with them. I told them they were mistaken and they said they'd remove my info from their mailing list. I never thought to follow up. Now it made sense. Camille had used my information, or convinced someone to do it for her. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe she didn't care if I did. I took photos of the statement and emailed them to Maya without adding a subject line or message. I knew she'd understand. Then I leaned back in the chair and let the silence fill the room. This wasn't just about money. Not anymore. It was about a pattern. One where I was only useful when I was invisible. Where love meant sacrifice and silence and being family meant looking the other way. I wasn't looking away anymore. I shut the cabinet and stood at the window again. It had started to rain soft and steady, misting the skyline in gray. The lake house would be soaked by now. The cedar porch, the lawn sloping down to the water. I wondered if they even remembered the promises they made that summer when I saved it. I thought about Camille in her silk robe sipping matcha lattes and taking phone calls in a baby voice telling people how hard she worked to make the wedding perfect. I thought about James and how quickly she had dismantled something I believed was real. And I thought about the wedding invitation still sitting unopened in my inbox, its scripted font promising love, elegance, and forever. I wasn't going. But I wasn't disappearing either. The next afternoon I called Maya. She answered on the second ring, voice crisp but warm the way she always sounded when she was in work mode, but still had one foot in our friendship. I told her everything. Not just the messages from my parents and Camille, but about the old credit card statement, the new proof. I told her about James. About the years of being made small so Camille could take up all the space. There was a long pause on the other end before she spoke. You know, this isn't just about the house anymore, right? I do. You want to proceed, yes, but I want to make sure the agreement still holds. It does, she said. I have the original file right here. Signed June 12th. They had 6 months. That puts the deadline at December 12th. They've neither bought the house nor paid rent. You're well within your rights. She clicked something on her end. I could hear typing. We'll file a formal notice to vacate. Certified mail plus 1 physical delivery. When do you want it sent? I hesitated. The rational part of me said to send it right away. Let the consequences land now. But another part of me, the part that still carried bruises in the shape of family expectations, wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done. December 16th, I said. Morning delivery, that's Camille's wedding. Exactly. Maya didn't ask why. She just said I'll draft the paperwork and schedule delivery. Thank you. After we hung up, I stayed seated at my kitchen counter staring at the grain in the wood. A single ray of winter light streamed in from the balcony, catching the edges of the coffee mug I hadn't touched since morning. My phone buzzed with a reminder about a project deadline at work. I ignored it. The world outside continued moving, emails piling up, meetings scheduled, deadlines approaching. But inside me, something had finally stopped. A machine that had been spinning for years was winding down. Later that night, Maya forwarded the draft notice. I opened the document, slowly reading every word. It was professional, unemotional, clear. Notice of breach and intent to reclaim property. 6 months had passed. No payment, no arrangement. The owner, Natalie Brennan, reserves the right to reclaim the residence located at 2406 West Lakeshore Drive. There was something both cold and empowering about reading it in legal terms. It stripped the emotion away and laid bare the facts. I had given them time. I had been patient. I had followed the rules. They hadn't. I typed my name into the signature field and hit submit. A few minutes later, Maya replied, "Got it. It's scheduled." I stared at the confirmation for a long time. For years I had played the role of fixer. The dependable one. The invisible backbone. When things broke, I paid. When people fell apart, I stitched them back together. But the thing about always being the one who holds everything up is that no one stops to ask what happens when you let go. And this time, I was letting go. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to ruin Camille's wedding. I just wanted them to see what it felt like when someone followed through. When consequences arrived, not in the form of a lecture but a legally binding document. I closed my laptop and stood by the window watching as the evening fog began to roll in over the city. Seattle in December was all gray skies and puddles, the kind of cold that seeped through layers no matter how prepared you were. But for the first time in months, I felt still. The lake house had been my home once. Before Camille's ventures turned it into collateral. Before my parents turned it into a secret. Before my silence became their expectation. Now it was my name on the deed. My name on the contract. And my signature on the notice. It wasn't vengeance, it was alignment. That night, I slept. Not long, not deeply, but enough to wake without the usual weight in my chest. The kind of rest that comes when a decision has finally been made, even if the road ahead is uncomfortable. In the morning, I made myself breakfast. Coffee. Toast. I read the news. Let the dog from across the hall run into my apartment again, like she always did when her owner forgot to latch the door. I pet her absent-mindedly, watching her tail thump against the floor. There was a time when I would have second-guessed myself. When I would have rewritten emails, called Maya to cancel, blamed myself for even having boundaries, but that time had passed. This was no longer about being the good daughter. It was about being the whole person. One who knew her limits. One who had drawn the line and wasn't going to erase it the moment someone cried. As the dog nosed her way toward my balcony door, I opened it and let her out into the cold, her tail still wagging. She paused at the edge, looking back at me like she expected permission. "Go on," I said. "You're allowed." She darted forward, chasing a leaf caught in the wind. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself smile. The next morning, I logged into a public records database I had access to through Apex's alumni legal network. I didn't expect much. Just curiosity at first. But 5 minutes in, I found something that made my coffee go cold in my hands. Event Hive, LLC. A sleek name. Incorporated 2 years ago in Washington State. Mailing address, my parents' lake house. I clicked through the registration. Owner Daniel and Lorraine Brennan. My parents. Not Camille. I blinked. I cross-checked the EIN with state tax records. She'd registered it under their names using their social security numbers and opened business credit lines, totaling over $110,000. Everything pointed to Camille being the one behind it. She was the one running ads. The one posting on social media. The one hiring freelancers. The one booking high-end venues. But legally, my parents owned it. My hands started shaking. I pulled open another tab and checked their addresses' lien history. Sure enough, 2 new secured debts had been filed in the past 18 months. Loans against the house, one for $35,000. Another for $75,000. It was all under the guise of growing Event Hive. This wasn't just a little creative borrowing. This was financial identity theft. From their own daughter. And they didn't even know. I closed my laptop and stood still in my kitchen, the hum of the fridge, the only sound in the room. Camille hadn't just made poor choices, she'd made calculated ones. And she always used someone else's name when she did. It was time to talk to the one person in the family who never bought into Camille's magic act. Grandma Marjorie lived in a red brick bungalow in West Seattle surrounded by overgrown hydrangeas and newspaper stacks going back 10 years. She was my mother's mother, a retired family law professor from the University of Oregon and the only person in our family who ever looked Camille in the eye and said no. When I arrived, she opened the door without a word, just looked me up and down and stepped aside to let me in. "You didn't come here for tea," she said, finally settling into her armchair. "Let's have it." I laid out everything. The LLC. The fake ownership. The loans. I even showed her the fake maternity announcement Camille had posted last month on a closed Facebook group for Ryan's family. I'd only found it because a mutual acquaintance had screenshotted it to ask if it was real. Marjorie raised one eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "She told them she was pregnant to speed up the engagement," I said. "Ryan's parents are very conservative. They think this is a real church wedding." Camille spun the whole thing like it's a family redemption arc. A clean start. That's why I got disinvited. I don't fit the narrative. Marjorie leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "Do your parents know about any of this?" "I think they suspect some of it, but they won't admit it. Admitting it means they were used." Again. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Classic codependency. "But you're not here to diagnose them. You're here to do something." I nodded. "The wedding is next Saturday. The notice gets delivered that morning. I want it to land before the vows." "And you want to make sure it actually lands?" "Yes. I want someone in the room who won't let Camille spin it into another pity parade. Someone who will speak plainly if she tries to lie again." Marjorie gave a slow, satisfied smile. "Now you're speaking my language." I hesitated before continuing. "But I also don't want to destroy them. Not completely. I just want it to stop. The cycle, the manipulation, the silence." Marjorie stood and walked to the old sideboard by her window. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thin manila folder. "I kept records," she said. "Over the years, Camille's fundraisers, GoFundMes, fake business websites, fake degrees. I tried to talk to your parents once. They shut me out. But I never stopped documenting." She handed me the folder. "If you're going to stand up to her, you'll need more than hurt feelings. You'll need proof. This is yours now." I swallowed hard and took it. "Thank you." She touched my shoulder, her grip surprisingly firm for a woman her age. "Just don't go in with revenge in your heart, Natalie. Go in with clarity, show them who she really is. Let them decide what to do with it." I drove home in silence, the folder in the passenger seat like a quiet passenger with its own pulse. That night I scanned everything and added it to my digital folder. Statements, screenshots, dates. It wasn't a witch hunt, it was a history. One that told the truth she kept hiding under lip gloss and gift bags. Camille wasn't just careless. She was dangerous. She lied with ease. She borrowed with charm. And when the bill came due, she disappeared and left someone else holding it. This time that someone wasn't going to be me. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to be silent, steady, and prepared. I was going to let the truth walk into that wedding and sit in the front row. The wedding was held at Crystal Pines Resort in Snoqualmie, nestled between snowy ridges and towering firs, the kind of place that looked like it belonged on the cover of a luxury bridal magazine. From the photos guests had already started posting online, the ceremony was everything Camille had promised it would be. A winter fantasy. Ivory roses suspended from glass orbs. Handwritten menus. A harpist playing acoustic Taylor Swift. Rows of chairs filled with polished shoes and seasonal designer coats. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. But someone else was. Maya's associate Rachel Lynn had arrived 15 minutes before the ceremony, dressed in a navy silk jumpsuit and long cream coat. No briefcase. No clipboard, just a small clutch and calm smile. She blended in like one of Camille's coworkers from her fake brand partnerships. She waited through the ceremony. Waited while Camille's voice trembled with performative emotion as she said her vows. Waited until the officiant said the words Camille had been dying to hear since the first time she caught Ryan glancing at her on campus. You may now kiss the bride. The crowd erupted in applause. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone let out a cheer. And then Camille stepped forward to thank everyone for coming. She always needed the mic. Always needed a monologue. She started with a rehearsed laugh about her journey, the setbacks, how love finds you when you least expect it. How family meant everything to her. Behind her, Ryan gave a stiff smile and sipped his champagne. That's when Rachel stood up. She walked slowly, gracefully down the center aisle as Camille spoke, holding a white envelope. Not a dramatic scene. Not even a disruption. Just a quiet interruption with purpose. She reached the front row, leaned in slightly, and handed the envelope to my father. He blinked, confused. Rachel gave him a polite smile and whispered, "It's a legal notice. You're being served." Then she turned and left. Camille froze. Ryan looked at her. What was that? She tried to laugh it off. Probably a wedding prank. You know how some people can be. He narrowed his eyes. That wasn't a prank. That woman said legal notice. Camille waved a hand. I'm sure it's nothing, maybe just a tax form or something about the house. I'll deal with it later. But Ryan stepped forward and grabbed the envelope from my father, who sat pale and sweating. His expression changed the moment he read the first paragraph. His voice dropped. You told me you owned the house outright. I do, Camille said too fast. Ryan held up the paper. This says you have 60 days to either purchase the property at market value or vacate. That the current owner is your sister. And that you've been living there rent-free since July. It's just a formality, she insisted. Natalie always does this. She overreacts. This is her way of punishing me. Ryan stepped closer, his voice low. Is this the house you said your parents gifted you after your business took off? She blinked. Is Event Hive even real? He asked it so softly, but I knew it cut deep. Of course it's real, Camille said. You've seen the photos, the events. He folded the paper. But it's not in your name. I use Mom and Dad's name for tax reasons. It's strategic. He stared at her. Did you lie about being pregnant? Her face strained. You said that's why we had to move up the wedding, that it would look better. That your family was finally stable again. That you'd cleaned up all the messes. Ryan, please. Can we not do this here? Guests were starting to whisper. A few phones had come out. My mother tried to pull Camille away, but she shrugged her off. You lied about a child, he repeated. About money. About your business. What else? She grabbed his arm. We'll talk about it at the hotel. He didn't move. You wanted the perfect wedding, Camille. What you didn't realize is that you built it on lies. And now they're collapsing. She snapped. Don't act like you're innocent. You wanted the fantasy too. You liked it. You liked me when I was dazzling. You didn't ask questions then. And he said the one thing I knew would break her. I liked the version of you that didn't need to control everything. Camille took a step back like he'd hit her. Ryan tucked the envelope in his pocket and walked off stage. The harpist kept playing. The photographer kept snapping. But the magic had cracked. And through it all, my parents sat in the front row silent, holding the evidence of everything they had refused to see. Ryan stepped down from the platform with the kind of focus reserved for closed-door negotiations, not wedding ceremonies. He didn't look at Camille. His eyes were locked on the man and woman who had raised her. My parents still sitting in rigid silence, clutching the envelope like it might spontaneously catch fire. Camille's hands twitched at her sides, manicured fingers curling and uncurling as her perfect day began slipping from her control. Her voice cracked first just slightly, but it was enough to turn heads. I can explain. Ryan didn't stop walking until he stood directly in front of my father. The music had stopped. The waitstaff froze mid-pour. Every guest within earshot leaned forward. Is this real? Ryan asked, his voice steady but cold. He lifted the lease agreement from the envelope and held it up between two fingers. Camille told me this home was yours. She said Natalie cut off contact years ago. Dad opened his mouth then closed it again. My mother's gaze darted from Ryan to Camille to the camera crew lingering awkwardly by the floral arch. Ryan turned to Camille. You lied to me. Not just about your finances. About everything. Camille took a shaky breath. Ryan, I was trying to protect our image. You said how important this day was. I didn't want any negativity. Negativity, he repeated. You mean reality. Her voice rose desperate and raw. You don't get it. Natalie's always had it out for me. She's jealous. She always has been. This was her plan all along. I took that as my cue. I stepped out from behind the row of decorative columns and into full view. No one clapped. No one gasped. The kind of silence that settles in just before a car crash fell over the room. Camille blinked like she was seeing a ghost. You're not even invited. I know, I said simply. She turned to the crowd, grasping for sympathy. See, she just shows up to cause a scene. She doesn't care about anyone else's happiness. She never has. I didn't respond right away. I walked toward the front, calm and measured, folder in hand. When I reached Ryan, I looked him in the eye. You deserve to know what you almost walked into. This isn't about me, it's about truth. I handed the folder to his mother. Inside was everything Rachel and I had compiled over the past month. Credit card statements. The false Event Hive business registration. A copy of the home agreement. Screenshots of Camille texting our parents to hide expenses under Natalie's name. Camille's face drained of color. Ryan's mother flipped through the folder with surgical precision. Each new page was a pin pulled from a grenade. You opened a business in your parents' name, she asked quietly. I was going to fix it, Camille said. I just needed more time. And the pregnancy. The words cut the air like a blade. People turned. A woman near the back dropped her wine glass. Camille flinched. That wasn't a lie. Ryan looked at her, and for a moment he didn't look angry. He looked exhausted. You told me you were 8 weeks along. We were planning names. Camille. I called your OB to confirm the first ultrasound. You never scheduled one. There is no baby, is there? Camille didn't answer. She couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was damning. Ryan nodded once as if confirming a final detail in a contract, then pulled the ring off his finger and set it on the reception table with a soft click. We're done. Number no, Ryan. Please. She reached for him, tears starting to fall, mascara already smudging. This is all Natalie. She did this. She planned it. I turned to my parents. You knew about some of this. About the loans. The credit cards. You told yourselves it was temporary. That she was still finding her way. My mother blinked rapidly. My father stared at the floor. You asked me for help and I gave everything I had. But when she told you to cut me out, you did it in a text. At 12:43 in the morning. Camille was sobbing now. Her gown, so carefully fitted and tailored, looked too tight, too heavy, like it might swallow her whole. You think this makes you better than me, she hissed. You've always needed to be the hero. I've always needed peace. But I let guilt make me your backup plan. That's over now. I faced the room, letting the words reach everyone who needed to hear them. When families enable harm, it doesn't make them loving. It makes them complicit. Silence is not compassion. It's cowardice in disguise. I handed my father a second envelope. In case you misplaced the first one. You have until the 20th of January. Either pay fair market rent or vacate. And don't worry, I've waived late fees for December. He didn't say a word. Ryan's mother stepped toward me and placed a hand gently on my arm. Thank you, Natalie. Then she turned to Camille. My family doesn't do business with deception. And with that they left. Guests began trickling out. A few looked back at Camille with a mixture of pity and relief, as if grateful someone had finally said what needed to be said. A cluster of bridesmaids stood frozen, unsure whether to follow her or flee. My parents sat still, stunned. Camille fell to her knees on the platform, not sobbing anymore, just quiet. Hollow. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt clean. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding everyone else's secrets. And I wasn't going to hold their consequences either. I walked out through the same doors I wasn't invited to enter. The air outside was sharp with pine and winter wind. Snow had started to fall. A white veil over a shattered illusion. I kept walking. I didn't expect the knock on my condo door that Monday morning. Detective Sanders stood in a dark navy windbreaker with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He introduced himself with the calm, clipped tone of someone who had seen far too many families unravel over money. "Miss Brennan, I'd like to speak with you regarding Camille Delaney and a company registered as Event Hive Solutions, LLC. Your name is not listed, but several financial records suggest you're connected to the owners." He didn't ask to come in. I stepped aside anyway. We sat at my dining table, sunlight cutting across the marble in cold, sharp lines. I handed him the folder I had kept sealed since the wedding duplicates of everything Maya and I had submitted to the civil lawyer. Camille's falsified signatures. The loans in my father's name. The wire transfers to luxury vendors weeks before the wedding. The application she'd filled out claiming a non-existent revenue stream to get a line of credit. He nodded slowly as he flipped through the pages. "Does your father know he's listed as the majority stakeholder? I think after last week he's starting to." Detective Sanders closed the folder and looked at me. "Then I think he's going to need a lawyer too." That hit me harder than I expected. My father might have been complicit through negligence, but he wasn't the one forging contracts. Still, in the eyes of the law, signing papers without reading them wasn't a shield. By Tuesday, Walter called me twice and left a shaky voicemail. His voice cracked halfway through. "Natalie, I didn't know she used my name. I swear. I thought I was just co-signing for a small vendor account. Your mom handled most of it. Camille said it was just temporary." I didn't respond. That night, Camille sent me a message that made me drop my phone in disbelief. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. You know, I never had choices like you did." No acknowledgement of what she'd done. No mention of the people she had dragged down with her. Just another deflection wrapped in victimhood, as if growing up in the same household had gifted me some secret path she never got. I forwarded the message to Maya, who called me immediately. The detective already contacted the DA's office. They're considering formal charges unless Camille cooperates. Fraud. Identity misuse. Bank deception. She still has a window to submit documentation and initiate repayment, but it's narrow. "Will they go after my dad?" "They might," Maya said gently. "Unless Camille takes full responsibility. And even then there's no guarantee. The thing is, I believed my father. Not just because I wanted to, but because I'd seen the way Camille operated. She was a master of keeping everyone just confused enough not to ask the next question. But belief doesn't fix legal exposure. Truth doesn't reverse liability. And now law enforcement was involved in a way that wasn't theoretical. Wednesday evening, I met Grandma Marjorie at her bungalow in Kirkland. She poured tea without asking and set the cup in front of me like I was still 16 and coming home with skinned knees. "You look exhausted." I exhaled long and low. I don't want to destroy her. But I don't know how to save her anymore without losing myself. Marjorie sat beside me, her silver hair pinned back like always, her voice firm. "Camille isn't 12, Natalie. She's a grown woman with a pattern. This is the first time someone else is making her live in the world she built. It's not cruelty, it's clarity." I nodded, holding the tea between my hands like an anchor. "But Dad," she sighed. "He's not innocent, he's not malicious either, he's codependent. That doesn't mean he's beyond consequence. But I know this family. If you back down now, everyone will forget within 6 months. Camille will find another way to spin it." I knew she was right. That Friday, Maya sent an update. "Camille has 1 more week to produce the financials and show movement on restitution. The DA might offer her a deal, lesser charges, if she cooperates fully and attends court-mandated financial counseling. She won't go quietly," I said. "Then let the noise be hers to make." The next morning, I watched the sun rise from my balcony, wrapped in a wool sweater, coffee growing cold in my hands. My phone vibrated. "Camille again. Please. Just tell them I didn't mean it. You don't understand the pressure I was under." Everything was riding on that wedding. I was trying to make a life. You already had yours. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed one sentence. You can still make a life, Camille, but not off someone else's. I hit send and closed the thread. No anger. No more explanations, just silence and the weight of a line finally drawn. The legal system was moving now, slow and deliberate, and for once I wasn't the one racing to cushion the blow. I wasn't sweeping the shards under the rug. Let the pieces lie where they fell. Let her learn what it feels like to be the one cleaning them up. That was the only love I had left to give. The call came on Sunday evening just after I'd sat down with a bowl of lentil soup and a muted rerun humming in the background. It was Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said to answer. Natalie, her voice cracked barely above a whisper. Your father's not well. He hasn't eaten properly in days. Camille's brass. She's just not herself. I didn't respond. I waited. We want to come see you. Please. Just once. No arguing. No drama, just talk. Not in Bellevue, I said finally. Of course, she said quickly. Your place, whenever you say, Tuesday, 6 o'clock. I'll buzz you in. I spent the next day cleaning, not because I wanted the place to look nice, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I scrubbed the counters, fluffed the pillows, wiped the windows, even though it was already dark by 4. I set out water glasses, but no snacks. I wasn't hosting. I was hearing them out. At 5:58 p.m., the building intercom buzzed. They came up together. My mom in a heavy green coat, no makeup. My dad looking smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of it all had finally landed on his shoulders. Camille followed behind them in an oversized hoodie, her hair tied back, her face drawn and pale. No wedding glow. No theatrics. Just 3 people walking through the door like they weren't sure what they'd find on the other side. I didn't offer hugs. I motioned to the couch. They sat. Camille on the edge of the ottoman, hands clasped tight. My mom kept fidgeting with a tissue. My dad looked straight ahead like if he blinked he might cry. We sat in silence for a moment. Then my father cleared his throat. I've made a lot of mistakes. I didn't answer. Not just lately. For years. For decades. He looked at me then, eyes glassy. I thought keeping the peace meant holding the family together. Letting small things slide. Not rocking the boat. Small things, I asked quietly. He nodded slowly. That's the problem. They weren't small. I just told myself they were. My mother sniffled beside him. I thought I was protecting Camille. I thought if we just gave her more time, more support, she'd find her way. You supported her by abandoning me, I said. You let her tell the world I was the cold one. You let her rewrite everything. We know, Mom whispered. We know that now. I looked at Camille. She hadn't said a word. She glanced up, met my eyes for 1 second, then dropped her gaze again. I'm sorry, she murmured. I waited. She tried again. I messed everything up. I know that. You didn't deserve any of it. I thought. I don't even know what I thought. I just kept going. One lie to fix another. And then I blamed you when it all broke apart. Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked down at her lap, breathing through her nose. I stayed quiet. She kept talking. I didn't come here to ask for anything. I just needed to say it. Out loud. The room fell still again. It was the first time in years Camille had spoken to me without twisting the narrative, without blaming me for the consequences of her choices. But I had learned better than to mistake admission for change. I believe you regret what happened, I said. But I'm not here to fix you. I'm not going to bury the damage just because you're finally facing it. Camille nodded once. There are going to be boundaries, I continued. Clear ones. Like what Dad asked. No more shared finances. No favors. No last-minute calls to clean up messes. If you need help, you go through the proper channels. You get legal advice. You do the work. Camille swallowed hard but didn't argue, and no more pretending. I'm not going to play the role of the difficult daughter while everyone else gets to be innocent. That's fair, Mom said softly. If we want a relationship, it has to be real, I said. Messy, honest. Not perfect pictures and silent suffering. My father leaned back and rubbed his face. That might be the hardest part, he muttered. But I'll try. I believe you will, I said. Camille looked up again, eyes red, but focused. Can we start over? Not from scratch, I said. But maybe. From here. She gave a small nod. We sat there for a long time after that, not saying much, just breathing in the quiet that finally didn't feel like suppression. When they left, Camille turned at the door. Thank you for letting us come. I didn't smile. But I didn't shut the door behind her either. That night I didn't cry. I didn't break down or second-guess anything I'd said. Instead, I made tea and sat at the window watching the lights of the city flicker. Not every ending needed to be a fire, some just needed to be a line in the sand. This time, it would hold. The next week, I invited them back, not for reconciliation, but for logistics. We sat around the same table this time with a yellow legal pad in front of me and Maya on speakerphone. I didn't want misunderstandings. Everything would be said clearly out loud and with consequences attached. I laid out the options. Option 1, I said, you sell the house in Bellevue. The market's strong again. Even after the liens and back taxes, you'll walk away with enough to cover basic expenses and reset somewhere quieter. Maybe Spokane. Maybe Arizona. My father leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. And option 2, you refinance the house under a new loan with your name only. You pay me back the $600,000 in full plus interest. But given your current income, that's not realistic. He nodded slowly. And the third, you don't pay it back. I drop all claims. But we dissolve all shared assets. I'll draw up a formal separation agreement. You'll be tenants in a property I own. Rent will be at market rate, no discounts. And you'll need to sign a fixed lease with legal terms. He swallowed. Your mother and I will need to talk. Take all the time you need, I said. But until a decision's made, I'm freezing the utility transfers. You're welcome to stay through March, but I'm not financing another summer. That was just the start. Then I turned to Camille. The district attorney's office is offering deferred prosecution. That means no jail if you complete the full 6-week financial accountability program plus restitution, planning, and therapy. But if you miss a session or falsify anything, the offer disappears. Camille didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she asked quietly, and if I do it, then you rebuild with your own name, your own credit, and your own limits. That's the deal. She nodded once. Marjorie texted me later that night after I updated her. Con không trả thù. Con đang dọn lại nền móng cho gia đình. I read it twice before setting the phone down. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like sweeping the floors after a flood. Everything soaked. Everything salvageable only if you stripped it down to the beams. My father chose to sell the house. It wasn't easy. He loved that property. The view of Lake Sammamish, the little dock where Camille and I used to fish in silence when we were still kids. But he admitted something that made me believe he meant it this time. I was clinging to a place because I didn't want to face how much of our life had rotted inside it. Maybe we all were. He called a realtor the same week. The house went on the market with an asking price of $1.2 million. Meanwhile, I helped him file paperwork to open a small bookkeeping office in Issaquah. He'd kept up his CPA license surprisingly, though it had lapsed for 2 years. We got it reinstated. I paid for the filing fees, but nothing more. The rest was up to him. Camille started her program the following Monday. 6 weeks, 5 days a week, mornings from 8 to noon. Financial counseling, fraud restitution, classes, personal responsibility modules. All court supervised. Maya kept tabs on her attendance. So did I. One morning halfway through the program, Camille sent a photo. It was a worksheet filled out in her handwriting detailing her credit card debt, spending triggers, and a section titled, What I Owe and to Whom. I didn't reply. But I saved the photo. At the end of week 4, she asked if she could come by. I said no. Boundaries weren't flexible, they were foundational. You can send updates, I said. But I'm not your sponsor. She replied with just one word. Understood. For the first time, she meant it. As January ended, I started to sleep better. Not because the past had healed, but because the future no longer felt like a trap. I could breathe inside my own skin again, make coffee without dread pooling in my chest, answer phone calls without rehearsing defensive scripts. My therapist asked if I felt peace. Not peace, I said, but space. And space is enough. That weekend I drove up to visit Marjorie. She met me on the porch in her old slippers and a cable knit sweater. "I heard the house sold," she said, handing me a mug of cider. I nodded. "And your father interviewing 2 clients next week. And Camille finishing week 5. No missed sessions." Marjorie leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking. "Sounds like a start." I sipped the cider and looked out over her frozen yard. The world didn't feel fixed, but it didn't feel broken beyond repair either. Just unfinished. And this time I was letting it rebuild on my terms. By mid-February, the changes were no longer theoretical. They were real, measurable, and awkward in their own ways. And they didn't come dressed in warmth or poetic closure. They came in quiet inconveniences, humbling shifts, and small ruptures in pride. Camille's court-mandated program began at 8 a.m. sharp every weekday. No phones, no outside contact, no designer handbags or curated personas. She had to show up in flat shoes and neutral clothing, turn in daily worksheets, and sit through 4 hours of lectures on ethics, personal responsibility, and fraudulent financial behavior. She was placed in Group 2 alongside a mix of embezzlers, credit card scammers, and one former social media influencer who had filed fake loan applications. Camille wrote me once saying it was like sitting in a mirror maze. Every story reminded her of herself. That was the point, I suppose. Week 2 hit her hard. She tried to open a new bank account under her name at a local credit union. It should have been a basic step, one of the exercises in financial independence outlined in her workbook. She walked in, handed over her ID, filled out the forms. Then the manager returned with a printed report and a furrowed brow. Multiple charge-offs. Bankruptcy proceedings. A flagged credit profile linked to a failed business. They told her no. Camille stood in the lobby holding the manila folder she had brought with her, staring at the floor tiles. She didn't argue, didn't cry there. But someone who worked nearby later told me she sat down on a bench in the corner and didn't move for 30 minutes. Just stared straight ahead, with her hands clenched in her lap. That was the first time I think she realized this wasn't temporary. Meanwhile, back in Issaquah, my father began his first official week at Brennan Bookkeeping. The office was barely more than a converted suite in a shared workspace with 2 particle board desks, a printer that jammed constantly, and a coffee pot that only brewed lukewarm sludge. But he showed up every morning at 7:30, wore a collared shirt and polished shoes, and brought his own calculator in a padded case like it was an heirloom. He called me after his first client meeting. They wanted help setting up a chart of accounts. I forgot how much I liked walking people through the numbers. His voice sounded lighter, like someone dragging themselves out of fog. He shared the space with 2 interns from the University of Washington. Fresh-faced, hyper-efficient, and full of jargon. At first, I worried he'd resist them. Instead, he brought them bagels every Friday and gave them career advice I suspected he wished someone had given him when he was 22. Eileen, for her part, started moving through the closets. At first, I thought she was just tidying, but then came the listings on Poshmark, Chanel, Burberry, Gucci. Bags I hadn't seen her carry in years. Next came the jewelry boxes, the gold cuffs, the sapphire earrings from their 25th anniversary. She sold nearly everything. Then on a Monday afternoon, an envelope arrived at my apartment. It wasn't handwritten. Eileen had always preferred typing. Inside was a cashier's check for $4,000 and a short note. "It's not everything, but it's real. And it's mine." I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't text her, didn't call. But that night I slept a little easier. Not because the money changed anything, but because it meant she had finally chosen to do something difficult without asking for applause. The ripple effects continued. Camille's name came up on a legal podcast Maya followed. Not scandalous, just a short mention in a case summary about financial rehabilitation paths for nonviolent fraud offenses. Camille would have hated it being reduced to a bullet point, a cautionary tale. But maybe that was what she needed. Week 4, I received another letter. It was thicker this time. Inside were her updated budget worksheets, a copy of her program completion certificate from the halfway point, and a list titled What I Owe. There were 4 columns: amount, lender, due date, plan. I studied it in silence. It wasn't flawless, the math was optimistic. But it was hers. She'd written a sentence at the bottom. I used to think control was power. Now I know it's just fear in costume. No request for forgiveness. Just insight. Quiet, sincere. I didn't reply that night. Instead, I stopped by Marjorie's house for tea the next day. She met me at the door with her usual grace, wrapped in a shawl that smelled faintly of cedar and cloves. "So she's doing the work," Marjorie said, pouring hot water into my mug. "She's trying," I said. "That's new." Marjorie gave me a long look. Then she smiled. "That's worth more than apology, you know." I nodded, then reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Camille's worksheet. She took it in her wrinkled hands and scanned it slowly. "Well, look at that. Our Camille is growing roots." That phrase stayed with me all week. Not blooming, not thriving, just growing roots. It was accurate. And humbling. Because before anything beautiful grows, the ground has to crack open. And that's painful, messy, and quiet. Later that evening, I opened my email to check some invoices. There it was. James Grant. Subject: just checking in. I didn't open it right away. I stared at his name, remembering how it felt to be abandoned by someone who chose silence over discomfort. Still, something in me was curious. The message was short. "I heard about the wedding. I hope you're okay." That's all. No demands, no apologies, no promises. I read it twice, then archived it. I didn't need to reply. Because not everything broken needs mending. Some things are meant to stay closed, so you can walk through a different door. As March approached, I started a new habit. Every Sunday, I wrote down 3 things: one thing I had let go, one thing I had done for myself, and one thing I was still afraid of. Week 1, let go. The need for Camille to say sorry the way I wanted. Did for myself. Went to the museum alone and loved it. Still afraid that I'll never fully stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I folded the paper and tucked it behind a framed photo of me and Marjorie from my law school graduation. It wasn't a ritual, not yet. But it felt like a start. The lake outside my window had thawed slightly, just enough for ripples to form beneath the thin surface. It looked like it was breathing. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle into my chest. March had come quietly this year. A letter arrived that morning. Real paper, real handwriting. The envelope was soft cream, the ink a little shaky. I didn't need to check the return address to know who it was from. Camille. I turned it over in my hands a few times before opening it. There was no perfume sprayed on it this time. No stickers, no attempt at sentimentality. Just a single folded page with 13 lines of writing. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain. She said she had finally learned that not every door should be knocked on twice. That some things were broken long before we realized it, and still it was our responsibility to rebuild not just the pieces but the hands that dropped them. She ended with one sentence. "I'm not asking to be let back in. I'm just asking to start from where I should have all those years ago, when I should have followed your lead instead of resenting your steps." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't feel vindicated. Or relieved. I just felt still. Like something had finally stopped spinning. That night, I sat on the sofa by the window with the lights off and watched the reflections of street lamps play on the water. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check emails or scroll through messages. I let the silence sit with me. For the first time in years, it wasn't heavy. There were no whispered accusations trailing behind me. No quiet comparisons over family dinners. No more having to prove that being responsible wasn't the same as being cold. I hadn't set out to destroy anything. All I ever wanted was for the truth to be seen. Walter had called the day before. Just to say he had signed the lease on his second client. He didn't ask for help. He didn't apologize again. He just shared something good without trying to use it as currency. Eileen had sent a picture of the hydrangeas blooming in the front yard of their new rental. It was smaller than the house in Bellevue, but the smile on her face in that photo looked more real than any I had seen in years. Even James had followed up with a second email. I didn't reply to that one either. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed him to understand. That chapter had closed with grace. My Sunday ritual continued. Let go, the hope that Camille would become who I needed her to be. Did for myself, I signed up for a pottery class. Still afraid. That next time someone crosses a line, I'll hesitate again out of habit. I'm not sure how long this peace will last. Family isn't a fixed thing, it's fluid. Sometimes it flows back in reshaped and unfamiliar. Sometimes it stays at a distance, and that's okay too. Camille may write again. Or she may not. What matters is that the silence between us is no longer hollow. It's intentional. Chosen. Healing. I've learned that love doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like distance with dignity. Boundaries aren't barriers, they're bridges we build from the ground of self-respect. And I'm done burning mine down to make others more comfortable. That winter I paid off the mortgage to protect the people I loved, and in return I was asked not to show up to celebrate them. But I showed up anyway. Not in that ballroom, not in a dress and heels, but in truth, in consequence, in the full measure of who I am. That's the kind of presence no one can erase. And now I no longer fear being left out of someone else's perfect story. Because I'm finally writing my own. And this one starts with boundaries. With silence that heals. With forgiveness that doesn't forget but chooses peace anyway. Love isn't endurance. It's choosing every day to honor your own limits while wishing others well from afar. So tell me this. If your parents told you not to come to your sister's wedding right after you paid off their mortgage, what would you do? Would you walk away? Would you confront them? Or would you rewrite the rules like I did? Let me know your story. Because every time we speak up, every time we break the silence, we give someone else permission to end their own toxic loop. And maybe, just maybe, that's how real healing begins.